This video is brought to you by my supporters on Patreon. Hey guys, I'm here with the second part of my video showing how I made the bow for my Tyrande cosplay. To start off, I took the patterns that I drew up and started tracing and cutting those out in EVA foam. I used a mix of 2mm EVA foam, 4mm EVA foam, and 6mm EVA. The 2mm EVA foam is the thinnest foam, which will usually be in white or a bright color, sometimes in black. And then 4mm EVA foam is the thicker black foam, and the 6mm EVA foam is the dark gray foam. I have the patterns for this piece available on my store Envy and Etsy. So once everything is cut out, I go ahead and start layering up some of the pieces, and I'm starting off with the part that attaches near the handle. I'm just adding a 2mm EVA foam layer on top of a 6mm EVA foam layer to give it some added depth and mimic the appearance that it has in reference photos and games. You'll better get to see what this part is later on in the video. Now I'm taking my Dremel and sanding down all of the pieces made from thicker foam. So on some of them, I'll be adding a bevel. To figure out where I need to add a beveled edge, I'm looking at a reference photo to see what on her bow looks like it has an angled edge to it. And for any sides that don't have an angle to them, I'm just sanding those down anyways to make sure that they're all nice and smooth. Next, I'm taking the piece that I just sanded and layering that on top of the feathers from the last video. So this piece is the piece that sits right here at the very top and just covers that entire top section to make it look all nice and neat and also mimic what's shown in reference photos. And I'm using contact cement to glue this in place. Next, I'm gluing the pieces that sit at the top of the feather section of the bow, like at the top of the piece that we just glued on, together. So these pieces right here attach at an angle. So earlier when I was sanding everything down, I made sure to add a beveled edge to the inside of these edges just to make it a little bit easier and make sure those seams would look a bit nicer once everything was glued together. So this top part right here is looking a bit messy, and we gotta clean that up before moving on and being able to glue anything else onto the bow. So to do that, I'm taking a Dremel and sanding everything down so that it is even with the two most outer edges. After that's all smoothed out, I coat it with contact cement, and then I also coat some sheets of 2mm EVA foam with contact cement as well. You can use full sheets for this or whatever excess EVA foam you might have lying around. Then I just layer that 2mm EVA foam sheet on top of the part that we just sanded smooth to cover all of those messy insides. And this doesn't need to be exact or measured out to anything, because I just layer it on as I go along. If it ends stops short like this one did, then I just layer a second piece in front of that until all of the messy bits are totally concealed. And then I just cut off the excess EVA foam from there. Jumping back over to work on the top pieces that were shown earlier, I'm adding two I'm adding 20mm EVA foam bevels around the edges. So I kind of just roughly measure these out and I glue them down as I go along, making sure any place that goes to a corner is cut at a pretty drastic angle, mostly because these corners are real tight and these bevels are real thick. So you gotta make sure everything's going to fit nicely into each corner. I'm going to have an entirely different video on how to connect EVA foam bevels to one another, as well as how to get them into corners and such, just as a overall kind of guide to follow. Make sure the top point or the top edge of all the bevels flow into one another. You don't want anything kind of just looking off or coming to a drastic stop and then not flowing into the other one. You want to make it look like it's all one long piece. This is just another piece that sits along the top of the bow that I'm also applying those 20mm EVA foam bevels around the edges to. Before I can glue the top piece to anything, I need to make sure that that piece from earlier, that where we just like cut off the 2mm EVA foam, the excess part, is nice and smooth. So I go in with a Dremel to sand that all out and smooth down that seam line. Now here's where I did a bad, and I forgot that I needed to attach a PVC pipe to the inside of the top section of this. So I went in and used a heat gun to help me open back up all those parts that I glued down earlier, that top part that I glued down to the base, and then cut away a big chunk of the top section of like the feathers, so that I could replace it with a PVC pipe. And the reason I need to do this is because I wanted to make sure that the bow could break down into smaller pieces, and I'm doing that by adding a PVC pipe that I can connect pieces to one another, like through. I'm using contact cement to glue that PVC pipe into place. As you can see here, I'm making sure I'm applying contact cement everywhere. It's as much as possible to make sure that that's really secure in place, since that's going to be fiddled with quite a lot, since I'll be putting PVC pipes in and out of it. I'm also adding in some hot glue to just hopefully like secure this more into place and fill in any gaps between the PVC pipe and the feathery base. So because I had to like remove the foam and then put it back, it kind of messed up the 2mm foam piece there. If you do this to start with, you shouldn't have this problem, but since I didn't and I did it now and kind of just like tore at that foam too much, made it really weak and flimsy, it kind of just flopped around the PVC pipe and added in all these wrinkles at the top that I didn't want. So to fix this problem, I went in and filled in those folds and creases with Cosplay foam or EVA foam clay. not cosplay foam, cosplay clay. I got this from Cosplay Crafts, which I have linked down in the description below. And this basically acts just like EVA foam once it's dried. So I let this set and dry and then sanded it down to make it all nice and smooth and blended in with the rest of the foam piece. Now I went to working on the handle piece. For the handle piece, I'm using a PVC pipe that I heated up with a heat gun and then bent into the shape that I needed. This took quite a long time because you have to make sure that this PVC pipe is like really hot, so you might want to wear gloves while working with it. And once it is like heated up enough, it should be pretty flexible and fairly easy to bend. However, it's going to have creases when you try to round it out. I hide that later though. You'll see later. Anyways, the little PVC pipe attachments I'm gluing into place on only one end, and that is the end that has the feathers and such to it, and I'm gluing that into place using contact cement because I don't want this to completely come off of both ends, so I want to make sure it's secured to one end, and I figured the best end for it to be secured to is the part where it's going to be covered in EVA foam anyways, because I'll have a harder time reaching that PVC pipe later on. Now that I finally have the actual base of the bow completed correctly, like I wanted it to be from the start, I go ahead and start gluing on the rest of the foam layers of the bow. So that's this piece right here that I was talking about just a little bit ago when I said that this PVC pipe attachment would be covered by EVA foam. That's this piece that covers it. I'm filling in any of the open spaces with other layering, like the 2mm EVA foam covers to close it off so that you don't see into the inside of the foam, like into the inside of the bow at all. You won't see these PVC pipes. I'm hiding them by adding a 2mm foam layer around all the sides of all of these pieces and attaching the other parts of this piece to the foam as well. You'll get a better idea of this as the video goes. But basically you just want to make sure that all the inner workings of this bow is hidden, and the easiest way to do that is just slab on some spare 2mm EVA foam, cut off the excess around the edges, and then sand that out. Any piece that seems like it might need a little bit of extra support to it, you can just go ahead and add in some like crossbars almost out of other foam pieces, or anything like a wooden dowel or anything like that. Anything you think would support it best. That's what I did with these very front or upper tips of this foam piece here, is I just stuck a slab of 4mm EVA foam in between the two pieces and sandwiched that together just to give it some added support. Here's what I was talking about earlier, where I said I'd just cover any of the open areas that I want to be closed so that you can't see the inside of the bow with 2mm EVA foam. That is what I'm doing in this clip. And if you're wondering what this white box is about, I had accidentally turned this box around and didn't realize it was showing on camera, and you could see the sender's address. And I didn't know if that's something I should block out or not, but ultimately decided I should just block it out to be safe because it was from a small shop. Now that all of the 2mm EVA foam pieces were glued into place and everything was pretty much covered, and I had already gone in and sanded out all of those seam lines to make sure everything was nice and smooth, it was time to start attaching the rest of the foam pieces onto the props. So these are pieces from earlier that sit at the top of the bow, those like triangular pieces. A little bit high, a little bit long, complete. Now it was time to move on to priming the pieces. So a couple last minute things that I ended up not being able to record. I think my battery died every time I tried to record these pieces, and I didn't have time to not work on this. So I went ahead and added in some of these little grooves using a Dremel to kind of mimic the appearance of like feathers almost. You know how they're like made up of like little individual, what are feather bits called? Pieces of hair or something? I don't know. But to kind of like mimic that appearance that it has, I added in these little scratch marks onto the prop. This is like something some of her reference photos have and some that like don't have it, so it's just kind of up to personal preference. The other thing I did was also add in 10mm EVA foam bevels to create the little swirls that are at the very top of the bow, those triangular pieces that we had just attached in like the last clip. Well, once that was all done, I went ahead and prepped or primed the entire piece with a couple layers of wood glue, about 3 to 5 layers.
Lips, they tasted like those cigarettes. Staring at the moon, we'd go to bed. In my arms, you're safe and sound, without a threat. And I can't wait to see what happens next. How far can we get if we sail a little bit high, a little bit low? How far can we get if we sail a little bit high?
After about 2 layers of wood glue, I applied Bondo's gap filler and spot putty, I believe it is called, or glazing and spot putty. Not quite sure. It's gap filler. Any kind of filler will do. People use wood filler sometimes. There's a lot of different options. Anyways, I applied that to most of the seams on the prop and then sanded it out. I should note the only reason you're seeing it on the feathers is because early on when I was sanding or dremeling in those markings, I accidentally made them face the wrong way and had to like go in and fill that in with Cosplay clay foam and then fill it in again now with Bondo's gap filler. You won't need to do this if you carve those lines in the correct way to start with, or if you just don't carve them in at all, if that is your preference. But basically, I messed up and had created a lot of extra work for myself. Now it was time for painting. I used my airbrush to paint this. I used silver to coat the entire thing. This took a little bit of extra time compared to if I just used spray paint. However, I wanted the silver to match the silver that I had used in the armor, and that silver was done via my airbrush, so I just stuck with using the airbrush to coat this entire thing. I'd recommend spray paint though. It's easiest, it coats fastest, it doesn't take quite as long, and this is a big area to cover, so that's probably the most inexpensive method as well, because this used like all of my silver.
Our lips, they tasted like those cigarettes. Staring at the moon, we'd go to bed. In my arms, you're safe and sound, without a threat. And I can't wait to see what happens next. How far can we get if we sail a little bit high, a little bit low? How far can we get if we sail a little?
This area of her bow is like this greenish bluish color, so taking the same color that I used to shade my armor, I used that color to like fill in this area, and to make sure that I didn't get any of this on the silver pieces, I used masking tape to mask off all of the silver spots. Now that all of the base colors were down, it is time for shading. I should note, because I'm not sure if it will show it in this video, that I shaded the green areas with the darker teal color that I also shaded the chest plate with, or the rest of the armor with, not just the chest plate. Why did I specify? Anyways. And then I shaded all of the silver areas with black oil paint. And before shading, I coated everything with a clear coat of glossy spray paint.
Our lips, they tasted like those cigarettes. Staring at the moon, we'd go to bed. In my arms, you're safe and sound, without a threat. And I can't wait to see what happens next. How far can we get if we sail a little bit high, a little bit low? How far can we get if we sail a little bit high, a little bit low? We're still a little bit young, but I'm all in. We're still a little bit dumb, but I'm all in. We're still a little bit young, but I'm all in. We're still a little bit dumb, but I'm all in.
To finish off the bow, I just had to wrap the handle with some white ribbon, and to secure this ribbon into place, I every once in a while dabbed on a teeny bit of hot glue. And that finishes up this video and the bow that I made for my Tyrande cosplay. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video series and found it helpful. It's not quite over though, because I have quite a few more pieces of my Tyrande cosplay to cover. So if you want to see that, make sure to subscribe and stick around. If you'd like to see finished photos of the cosplay, I posted those on my Instagram and website. And if you want the templates for this or any of her other pieces, those are available on my store, Envy and Etsy. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So thanks for watching, guys. Have a lovely day. Bye!